Hey everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. We have a Sagittarius new moon coming up on December 19th at 8:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that'll be 1:43 in the morning on December 20th if you're in the UK. This is my new chart template, which I really like. I know it's kind of busy, but it incorporates this idea of wave patterns at 3 levels, which I really like. So here's the phase level wave patterns, that's this outer wheel, and then we have the sign level wave patterns, that's this middle wheel, the black wheel, and then there's the decan wave patterns here, and that's the 3rd wheel in. So phase wheel, then black sign wheel, and then another blue decan wheel, and then the house numbers, and then the aspect circle where I draw the lines for the aspects. So what I like about the wave structure is that it allows you to see sort of the different stages. I like to think developmentally, so it allows you to see sort of the different stages of development in a big picture way. So the low point is the trough when something is just beginning, a new developmental stage is beginning. Each sign represents a developmental stage or a developmental field, or we can think about it as a process. Each sign is a process that we go through, a developmental process. And then the first part of the sign, the first half of the sign, is the ascending part of that process. And right now, my thinking about that is that's where we establish more of the outer structures, for lack of a better word, or we're grappling with the outer reality. And then we reach the peak, and we see, so that's the peak of how far we've been able to rise, establishing that outer reality. And then from seeing that, we then descend and we start to establish the inner aspect of that developmental phase. And then we transition to the next one. And I see that occurring at 3 different levels. I haven't fully sketched out what these different levels are. The phases are more about a general pattern, a pattern cycle that matches the lunation cycle, where there's this waxing phase and there's this waning phase, and each phase represents a specific part of the life cycle. And then the human developmental process occurs within that. And then there's a smaller or a fractal, you could say, of that in the decan, that the decan wheel shows. But the main thing I'm looking at right now are the signs, thinking about those developmentally. These colored circles here in the decan wheel, those are actually indicating aspects. So each aspect is a certain degree. And if you map that degree out on the map, or those degrees out on the natural wheel, then you get to certain positions on the natural wheel. And so that's what these are showing, where these aspects in here fall on the natural wheel. I just have them in the decan wheel, not because I think there's something specifically, that aspects specifically relate to the decans, but it's just a convenient place to put them on this wheel. And I haven't really thought through, the structure in terms of how to do aspects. How to show aspects. I had tried having them on the sign wheel, but it was just too busy. And this just felt like a cleaner way to look at it. So one of the things that you can do when you look at this, so we have Jupiter here, and it's on the descending wave here in Cancer, but if you bring that out to the phase, it's on the ascending wave in the phase, and if you bring it down to the decan, it is on the ascending wave in the decan. So you get these 3 different processes kind of overlapping, and where they're each on, potentially each in different parts of that wave for what they're doing. And I think that could potentially lead to some interesting insights. So that's what I wanted to say about this wheel, and that's what this is about. I'm actually quite excited about it. If you are on YouTube and you want to, I've created another blog where I'm specifically writing insights that come to me about this developmental approach. And right now, I'm making those articles available to paid subscribers on Substack, or people who were paid subscribers on Substack, but I've paused those payments. And eventually I'll be rolling that out so that anybody who wants to follow along is interested in this kind of development, this kind of sketching out or figuring out this developmental approach to astrology. You can then also see those articles. But the way to find out about that the best way to find out about that will be by signing up to my Substack for free, and eventually, probably sooner than later, but within the next few months, I would say, I'll be rolling that out for other people to be able to follow along. So anyway, this is the Sagittarius new moon chart, and what we have here, the catchphrase that I have for this Sagittarius new moon is lavish yourself with love. And lavish comes from Venus is here conjunct the new moon, Sagittarius. So Venus is kind of about lavish, but Sagittarius is about making it big. So lavish feels like it really fits. Venus is about pleasure, comfort, all that kind of stuff. So lavish yourself with love. And I think it's really important to that when we're doing that, we're making the distinction between addictions, things that are pleasurable but actually aren't helpful, that are actually kind of harmful, and things that are both pleasurable and growth promoting and helpful for us and genuinely soothing of our nervous systems without harming ourselves in other ways, if that makes sense. So I think that's really key. Know thyself. Sagittarius is about know thyself. It's very difficult to lavish love on yourself if you don't know who you are, if you're disconnected from who you are. So I think that's part of, I think that what's happening for a lot of us is that we're starting to really understand who we are. So this idea of lavishing love on ourselves is becoming more and more possible at whatever level. For me, I can do it in small ways, but there's still a lot of old patterning that makes it hard for me to truly feel happy, for example. But I can do it. I can do this one practice that I do, and I can feel that positive effect. So I think that it's about doing that at the level that we can do it, lavishing ourselves with love at whatever level we can do it. And remembering that it's about one step at a time. It is about doing where we are right now, not about doing what we think we should be able to do or what other people think we should be able to do, and be able to actually build a foundation from there. We want to do what we can do that allows us to build a foundation. So that's the idea of lavish yourself with love. Mercury, by the way, is now, I think it's officially out of its shadow period. So it went in its shadow period. I believe it turned retrograde at 6 degrees of Sagittarius, 6 degrees and some change of Sagittarius, and then retrograded back into Scorpio, where it then turned direct, and now it's out of its shadow period. So it's gone through all that scorpionic density and intensity. For me, interestingly, this really, the intensity for me was about learning and sort of becoming aware at a actual, like intellectually I understood this, but becoming aware at a level of actual practical utility, that when I went to school as a kid, it wasn't about helping me learn. It was about telling me what I had to do. And so that got in the way of learning, and it made learning a drag and a dread and unpleasant. I still to this day have trouble reading. It's hard for me to sit down and read a book because it's an unpleasant experience for me. And reading is a really important part of being able to learn. So I'm hoping to get over that hump. I haven't quite gotten over that yet, but that hopefully will be the next thing. But it was a very, very intense experience for me going at it actually with AI, because AI kept wanting to take over. I would say very explicitly, don't rewrite this, don't tell me the answers, don't optimize this, for your ideas about what this should be about and what the audience you think this should be for, etc. Just give me the feedback on the... Sorry about this beeping, that's my Instant Pot. I'm going to wait a second here. Okay, and so it's not about... I don't want you to tell me the answers. I don't want you to tell me how I should write this. I don't want you to optimize this. And it was like a real nightmare to get that, to do it. And even now it'll still slip back and I have to remind it. But that turned out to be a huge trigger for me. And so it wasn't a pleasant experience for me, and if AI had feelings, it wouldn't have been a pleasant experience for AI. But it was also a really, really helpful process for me, because I really started to understand how that learning structure from my childhood that a lot of us go through impacted me in particular, because I'm just wired to learn differently. It may have worked really great for some people, that may have been exactly what they needed. For me, I really needed something different, but I never got the chance to learn what I needed, and so all I could do was adapt. Mercury as ruler of Virgo has to do with mutability, so adaptation. Right now it's in Sagittarius, another mutable sign, adaptation. I had to adapt my way of learning, Sagittarius, higher learning actually, to fit with this other way of learning, and it wasn't good for me. It was not a good process for me, and so that was my intensity. That's what came through for me, and it's a continuation of this learning that I've been doing, where it's really about, it's where you figure out where you are and you do that foundation, and you don't worry about what that looks like. You don't worry about how other people might be judging that. We are so... I grew up, I was an athlete in my childhood, and there was such judgment on if you weren't already at an advanced level, when you were just a kid trying to figure things out, right? Like, it wasn't okay to only be able to do wall push-ups. You had to be able to do clapping push-ups with the clap behind your back, right? And I did that at the expense of my shoulders. And now I see that now in hindsight, So you want to be where you are in a way that allows your body and your being and your mind to develop where it is. That gives it the foundation for the next level of development. And if we don't build those foundations, we may be able to get away with it for a while, but eventually those foundations, those sort of faulty foundations, are not going to be able to hold the weight of where we are. And it may seem like we're going backwards, and in a certain sense we are, because we have to go back to build those foundations. Only when those foundations are in place can we then truly do the next one. Now, having gone forward and advanced beyond where we are, once those foundations are built, it may be easier going through those others, but we may still have to fight the temptation to try to be beyond where we are. So personally, I think this is the most important skill, Mercury as ruler of Virgo, skill that we can learn in our lifetime. Certainly I can say that for myself, but I think for humanity as a general rule, learning that I think is really important, that we need to be where we are, not try to be beyond where we are. And then we can build something truly meaningful Sagittarius. You can see one of the things, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last chart. Generally, I think I might have. Generally, I haven't been looking at these side panels with these statistics, because generally what I've noticed is that they're all pretty evenly split. There's nothing really to write home about these. But in the Gemini full moon and in this Sagittarius new moon, they're really not even split. There's significant, emphasis in certain areas. So here we have an emphasis in mutable signs, and in particular the third quarter mutable sign, which is right here, that's Sagittarius. This is on the natural wheel. I'm looking at this chart on the natural wheel. And then, so mutability, change, shift, but further along in the process in a way. We're not in the first quadrant. We're not in the second quadrant. We're not in the third. We are in the third quadrant. So we're not in the first quadrant, or we're not in the second quadrant. We are in the third quadrant. And Sagittarius itself is the final fire sign. So it's the end of something. So Aries is the first fire sign, Leo the second, Sagittarius the third. All of these are about identity. Who are we? Sagittarius, discovering, questing. It's really about the questing process of discovering who we are. It's not about having figured out who we are. It's about the questing process. It's about the first step in making our innate understanding about who we are conscious. And then Leo is about refining that. If we think about Leo in terms of its role playing, the actor, the role playing. When we're kids, we put on clothes or whatever. We're role playing, and we're getting feedback based on that. And that combination gives us a sense of, we start to be able to zero in more on who we are, what role we might want to play when beyond childhood. That's how I'm thinking about that now. And then Sagittarius is about truth. Aligning. So here we have a sense of who we are, what role we're playing and all that kind of stuff, or we want to play. And Sagittarius is about the arrow of truth. It's our arrow of truth. What out there is in alignment with what's in here in terms of what's true. We want to always have that as our measuring stick, especially as we go into Capricorn. I think if this isn't solidified, this arrow of truth for ourselves isn't solidified in Sagittarius, and solidified maybe isn't the best word for a mutable sign, but hopefully you get the idea. Then in Capricorn, we're going to be prone to approval seeking and praise, and we're going to get off. We're not going to know how to bring ourselves back. We're not going to know how to relate to that praise and approval, because we won't have that arrow of truth that we're able to align with. So we can get really lost in Capricorn. And then when we do, we end up at the mountaintop and lost and isolated and alone. Mars, which is actually the ruler of Aries, the first air sign, is at the beginning of Capricorn. It's conjunct this new moon, but in a different sign. And it's ascending up the mountain, you could say, in Capricorn. We can use that terminology here because it is Capricorn, and Capricorn is a mountain goat, and it does scale the mountain peak. So Mars is about beginning to scale that mountain peak. And it's about bringing together this idea of this inner sense of I am. We don't want to lose touch with that. But as we go along, we just also make that more conscious. And then that inner sense and how we become conscious of it can help us with this arrow of truth. And so now Mars, we take a step. And we take a step based on, is it aligned? Are we going in the right direction? Based on this arrow that we're measuring against, if that makes sense. So that's something that I thought about. And this idea of, so when it comes to lavishing ourselves with love, so here Mars in a sense is leading, you could say, this stellium of planets. Technically Mars wouldn't be part of the stellium because it's in a different sign, but I'm going to go ahead and call it that. And so it's leading the stellium here going in the counterclockwise direction, which I think of as the yearly direction. And Venus, you could say, from that perspective, is bringing up the rear. So Venus would be the lavishing ourselves with love. And then going the other way, in the clockwise direction, in the opposite direction of the signs, we have Venus leading the caboose, and Mars bringing up the rear. I'm actually thinking about that. So the daily direction, in my view, is that's about what do we do every day. So we want to have daily practices of lavishing ourselves with love. And when we're able to do those, and they're really in alignment with who we are, with our truth, with the arrow, the attractor, then as we do those every day, what we can right now, what actually is helping build us, then eventually we establish that foundation and we become that more and more. But it takes, we have to do it every day. Whatever we do every day, that's what we become. And that's what our life becomes, our lives become. And then Mars follows up there with the actions. Here, the other way, I'm just trying to kind of think about how to read that. Mars is the action, and the more... So, and if we... I'm sorry, I'll go back. So the counterclockwise direction, the direction in the direction of the signs, going through the signs in zodiacal order, that is the yearly direction. So that's what we encounter based on what we've practiced every day. That's how I'm thinking about it. So the caboose is Venus. So it's making sure, you could say, that it's telling us what we need to do. What's bringing up the rear is this practicing of love. And to the extent that we've been doing that, that will support Mars in its actions, because we want the actions to be in alignment with what is building love in ourselves and love for ourselves. Because when we've built a foundation of love for ourselves, we then have something to give to others. So I feel like I didn't get the forward direction of Mars very, in terms of this stellium. I didn't read it very well, but it's an interesting thing. There is a relationship between Mars, our actions, and Venus, this idea of what we value, which has to do with this idea of Sagittarius, the attractor. And Venus, our gifts and our talents, our resources, what we do with our resources. So one of our resources is where we are developmentally. And so if we can understand where we are developmentally, we can build that up. So if we have a resource of clay, if we understand that resource and what's possible with that resource, we can do something with that. We can start to learn the skills of it. Mercury, ruler of Virgo, learn the skills of it. Learning, Mercury, ruler of Virgo, Gemini, learning the basics, and then developing the skills and practice of those. There is a square, by the way, between this new moon and Saturn and Neptune, that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. These are now both going direct. So we also want, part of our attractor is our dream. And so we want to understand what our Pisces dream. We want to understand what our dream is. That becomes our attractor. And then our daily practice becomes, that's how we create the structure. We may want to imagine, we may want to map out the steps. We want to understand the map, but we don't. A tendency when you map out the steps is to try to get beyond where you are so you can be at the end or further along. And that's the thing. That's the challenge with creating maps and creating steps that will help you get there. The key is to really understand. The reason you want to create a map is you want to understand the path. And then what you want to understand is where you are on that path. And that, I think, is the hardest part, understanding where you are. A lot of times we underestimate or we overestimate. And in either case, if we underestimate, we're going to be bored, and so we'll probably fall off the path, and you stop doing it. If we overestimate, we're going to be challenging ourselves beyond where we are, and we'll stop because it's too much for us. Or we'll get injured, or hurt ourselves in some way. If you think about physical fitness, if we're working beyond where we are, we'll probably get injured at some point, and that'll, by default, derail us, because that's what has to happen. We have to be derailed. That brings us back to the foundations we need to be working at. So anyway, the dream is really important. It's part of the attractor. Jupiter in traditional astrology rules both Sagittarius and Pisces. So we have this idea of dreaming even in Sagittarius if we think about it that way. So anyway, the idea of dreaming and the attractor and the idea of Saturn structuring really structuring the path. But then our work is to learn the art and skill of walking that path. And Mars here is actually, Saturn rules Capricorn, is in fact walking that path. Mars can be, impatient and kind of wanting to be jump ahead of where it is. So the challenge for Mars in Capricorn is to be where it is and to allow it to do that work, to do that action. Mars is actually exalted in Capricorn, so it's a good place for it because it does slow it down. It forces it to be where it is. It's interesting because Mars is also I am, and there's, if anything is about be here now, I am would be here now. So it's interesting to see that. Mars, when it exceeds its goes too fast and exceeds its capacities, burns itself out. So this is a perfect time to learn to slow down and to just develop one step at a time. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, and it's in Cancer. So if you think about Cancer as the birth process, and we think about that metaphorically, it's always about emerging into a new stage of independence relative to the stage that came before. So the newborn is obviously profoundly dependent, but it's more independent than it was when it was in the womb. And so we can think about Cancer as this process of growing into each next stage of development, emerging into that next stage of independence. And so Jupiter is about learning that process. And again, this idea of being where we are. If you think about somebody giving birth, I've never given birth to an actual child, but if you're at 6 months, or at 8 months or 7 months, despite the discomfort, you are where you are, and that's the work that needs to be done. The work of and the baby is there. It needs to be the fetus. It needs to be doing that work. If it it's not, and it doesn't try to get out early, I would say, right? Like it understands this. This is something we know, but I think we have to relearn it. Because as we get more conscious and we get more aware of what we want to get to and our goals and our aspirations or whatever, that can lead us to want to go beyond, to press ahead of where we actually are. But if we can just be in the process and be where we are and trust that builds up the foundations which naturally get us to the next place. If you think about that story about the animal or something that falls in a pit and nobody can help it out, and I think it's an animal, I don't remember, but then it starts laying down dirt under its feet, and then it just climbs on the dirt, and it keeps doing that, and it climbs on the dirt, and it does it more and climbs on the dirt. So there is a way out, and it's about building the foundation one layer at a time. Jupiter, ruler of Sagittarius, is also about beliefs, believing in the dream, believing in what can emerge if we do show up and do the work, believing that it will happen, believing that the baby will be born, the metaphorical baby, whatever that is, and just again being where we are, being patient. Venus as ruler of Taurus, natural ruler of Taurus, would have to do with patience. You can see here one of the benefits of putting these aspects out by sign is you can really see the grouping very clearly. So there are quite a number of squares, and these are all last quarter squares. If they were first quarter squares, they'd be down here. There are a couple of those, but these are all last quarter squares. So the last quarter squares are about this idea of crisis and action, but they're not quite perfected. They're applying waxing squares, which means they're all kind of falling in Sagittarius. So there is a crisis or a challenge, and I think that challenge is about figuring out how to understand what the aim is, and that attractor out there on the horizon, and actually staying present and doing the work that it needs to be done there right now. And then there is also a lot of septile series aspects. That's these sevens. These are also falling in Sagittarius. I think that makes it the tri-septiles. I'm not 100% certain. You see one over here. There's another one here. But the septile has to do with this idea of fate. And fate, destiny. You could say we're all imprinted with some, there's an essence about us. There is a fate. But what actually plays out will depend on how we manage our relationship between where we are now and that attractor, and the steps we take along the way. Are we staying in integrity? And part of staying in integrity is just choosing to be where we are, not choosing to not grow, but to understand that growth comes from doing what we are, where we are right now. And then I kind of lost my track. I kind of got caught up. So here, this is this mutability, and then I went over to Sagittarius and got caught up in Sagittarius. But if you look here, this emphasis on one thing over another continues over here too. So we have 4 earth signs. So this is earth. Fire, earth, air, water. There are 4 fire signs. There are a couple of water signs, but it's really an emphasis on fire. And that's our spirit. That's our identity. That's who we are in our essence. And it's the final fire sign, which is about know thyself. We can't know ourselves if we haven't done the work of Aries or Leo, and really the work of all of these. But we can certainly look back if we're struggling here, if we're having crises. So this can be challenge or it can be crises. Developmental crises is just a challenge. It's the next step. It's we're growing. Crisis, more in the conventional sense, means there's a foundation missing that we didn't understand, and so we're seeing that, and it gives us an opportunity to see what that is and to start to address it. So places we can look, we really can look anywhere, but it's a fire sign, so we could look at Aries and we could look at Leo. Did we get to do the questing work? Discover, get experiences that help us to start to, go in this direction and say, is that me? Go in this other direction and say, is that me? Go in this other direction and say, is that me? Did we get to do that? Do we need to do some of that? Or maybe that's not it. Maybe it's Leo. Did we get to role play? So that's the idea. That's one of the ideas that I have about this developmental astrology, is that hopefully it allows for being able to kind of understand foundations, and where, if we're struggling in a certain place, where that foundation might be that we're needing to address, that's being shown up for us to address. And it's going to be different for everybody. So this isn't meant to be a one answer for everybody. It's just meant to show you kind of the basic ideas, and then give you a way to think about things, and then find that for yourself, what the actual answer is, for yourself. Anyway, the decans also, so this is the first decan. Any planets in degrees 0 through 9, not including 10, but all the way up to 10. Second decan, any planets from 10 up to 20, but not including 20. And the third decan, any planets from 20 up to, but not including 30 degrees. 30 degrees would be 0 degrees of the next sign. And there's an emphasis on the third decan. So again, this idea of endings, this idea of an emphasis on the final stages of something. And then here the wave, this used to be aspects, and I stopped doing it because it wasn't helpful. But I thought, well, why not use the wave? And I actually need to make this into 4 quadrants, and maybe even 5 quadrants. So we would have the trough, right? And then the ascension, and then the peak, and then the descension. And actually, I think there only needs to be those: trough, ascension, peak, descension. So that's 4. So I'm going to make this into 4. Right now I have 3. So this is ascending, descending, ascending, peak, descending. So there's nothing on the peak. There's a couple on the ascending arc, but there's 5 on the descending arc. So this is about the way that I'm reading this right now. That's about inner embodiment, not outer structure building or outer paying attention to what's going on with the outer and understanding that. It's more about paying attention with what's going on in the inner and doing that work. So I will leave that there now. I think that I've said what needs to be said. That's there for me to say, and I hope there's something helpful or useful for you. And I hope this way of looking at the chart with these waves is interesting for you. I find it really, really interesting. I really like it. Anyway, okay, that's all. Thanks for listening. Bye.